Surprise class reworks. That has been the vibe with almost every alpha build of the War Within so far, and it's been fun. We log in, we see things are different, and then a blue post pops up, full of changes and all the reasoning behind them. It's been great. Now, with the last build, there has been, of course, another wave of unexpected changes, so I basically thought now is a good time for us to gather together to go through these things, even though, of course, there will be more tweaks and refinements to come. So, cursory glance over the big exciting things today, explaining them briefly, and then when we get a little bit more final and beta launches and it's time to properly go hard, we will do individual videos to hit every single class with the full depth that they deserve. It'll be hype. To do that, I've assembled a team, and today you and I are going to pay their bills with today's sponsor.
I'm thrilled to say our Ridge, this is awesome because their products are amazing. I've been using them for years, and I'm going to scrap the whole cheesy MMO, gear yourself up IRL idea that I had for something a bit more simple, right? Your wallet and your keys are things you use every day, so why not make them outstanding? Ridge's wallet is absurdly thin and functional. Their key case is simply the best. I mean, there's no key jangle. There's no keys sticking into your leg. And the best news is that for Father's Day, you can go to ridge.com/bellular for up to 40% off. Now, I would get my dad kitted out, but the problem is I actually already got him a wallet and a key case for Father's Day last year. So here's why I love my wallet and my key case. The wallet is super, super thin and it's super customizable. Number one, colorways. You have so many different options. They look absolutely incredible. I mean, Father's Day discount plus them having a brass model. Oh, that's tempting. Now, they're RFID blocking. They carry all the cards that you need, and if you want more functionality, you can customize them. You can put a cash clip on, a coin holder, an AirTag holder, which is big, and another nice new feature, they are MagSafe compatible, and it even ships with a little locking plate for these guys, so it goes in properly secure. And then the key case, something that I have carried with me every single day for a long ass time. So here's the gunmetal one they sent me, here's my own one. Basically, you put your keys in, they're held nice and secure in whatever order you put them in. They don't jangle about. There's a nice little clip. And of course, you want to put an AirTag on. That's real easy. I bought mine because I wanted a nice, simple, everyday upgrade that I would enjoy. That's exactly what I got. I've been a happy customer. That's why I reached out to work with them. And if you hit up ridge.com/bellular, you'll of course find their Father's Day discount. However, there's nothing stopping you from treating yourself. So thanks, Ridge. Go check them out. Let me know what color you think looks the coolest. With that said, let's get into the video.
Warlocks, let's start with you. You guys have been on a goddamn roller coaster. The Fun Police, of course, showed up for your abilities in a way that actually felt like classic stubborn Blizzard, but thankfully, they actually did have more going on behind the curtain. That does mean that though there have been a few L's, there's plenty of wins too. Demo locks have had their class talent tree fixed up quite a bit. Basically, they've turned a lot of 2-pointers into 1-pointers. Now, you're still losing the demonic cores nerf, right? So that is a big nerf to your mobility, but they are trying to make up for that with other ideas, like other changes and fixes. So here's the more important ones. You've got a new Vile Fiend. You can pick up one of Sargeras' Demon Dogs to upgrade your Vile Fiend with, so that's pretty cool, and it's up every 30 seconds with 0 cost. Then Tyrant is actually now easier to get to in the tree, and it's always your core cooldown, and that does mean that Nether Portal has been closed and been replaced by a Doom rework that actually does a big-ass AoE explosion and also summons in a Doom Guard. There were worries. It does seem, though, that with some of those losses, there have actually been some wins, and of course this is just another iteration on top of some pretty good news that we already got post-demonic core spookiness. Okay, Destro then. So it had some of the same issues as Talents, and those have been looked at. Some of their RNG damage is gone, and that's with the extra mastery talent now being fixed at 70%, and there's a bit more power being put into some rarely taken talents, things like Soulfire, Demon Fire, and Shadowburn, and they've done that through a ton of additional buff talents, which you might think would be a problem, but to get the points to pay for that, a load of 2-point talents have been turned into 1-point talents, and another decent few have been removed, things like Cry Havoc, as well as generally a huge tree revamp. So get this, Soulfire is now a capstone, and Dimensional Rift is actually your core spec cooldown, and it's in the middle. Now, there was a drama about losing Infernal from Blasphemy, and that still is happening, but you're going to get an Overfiend instead, so at least you still do get a demon from that. Affliction then, you've got a massive amount of changes. Loads of passives and effects have been gutted, and a lot of stuff has been added in their place. But it's not a rework. This is a class that is obviously still based around multi-dotting, slapping on an unstable affliction, and mashing Malefic Rapture. Now, the biggest news here is that Siphon Life is passive, so that's just one dot gone entirely. Doom Blossom and Dread Touch are also gone. They're replaced by a new ability that's called Oblivion, and what Oblivion is basically a single target drain soul, but it's a shard spender that is boosted by dots on the target, and also their cooldown reduction has been removed, so Dark Lair is now a solid 2 minutes. And that's just something we've generally seen, like they've been doing a lot of refining like cooldowns on different classes. A nice touch, though, is that there's a talent that gives Rapture a chance to launch a Shadow Bolt volley, which, guess what? It looks nice. It's like playing an ARPG. It's just cool when stuff explodes out of your character. Other than that, though, it has got what looks to be quite a nice talent tree reorganization, so that should be good for just your day-to-day theory crafting and usability. Next, then, the other Warlock class, the Mage. Okay, Arcane Mage, you guys used to be complicated. You're not really as much anymore. Arcane used to have a proper launch sequence, like seriously, it was easily the most complicated opener in the game. They had a very complicated burst window, and in ways it was good. It was decently rewarding when you actually mastered it, but it was very fragile. A slight mistake or an interruption would just tank your damage, and that was tricky because, of course, just boss fights, Mythic Plus, it just wasn't amazingly suited to playing World of Warcraft, although admittedly, very fun in a target dummy for most people. Now, what they've done is they've taken Radiant Spark, Mana Gem, and Nether Tempest, and they've thrown them all in the bin. They've replaced them with a whole bunch of talents that just give passive bonuses to play around instead. As an example, there are new Touch of the Magi talents to buff it, and one of them adds a hit with all 3 of your main abilities to cause a burst element. So basically a more usable version of Radiant Spark that doesn't end up being like extremely technical to actually do right. Another thing then, clear casting. Clear casting is now needed to use your arcane missiles, so basically they can buff it without it just taking over the rotation. So that's a real good tool for them as designers, and it just clarifies its role in the gameplay. Also, Familiar is actually now baked into Arcane Intellect. So overall, what we see in these changes is basically Arcane, it will still feel like Arcane in its visuals and stuff. Some things have been codified. A lot of the tacticals, though, have been simplified down, I think, in a way that a lot of people will actually appreciate. This is one of those things where initially I saw these changes, thought, man, Arcane's niche, but I know there are people who love it. I did see, though, a lot of positive sentiment about this. So big picture, these are changes that help it fit into most gameplay situations better, but of course, it does lose a bit of what made it unique. Another thing, mages as a whole have lost double time warp too, so yeah, double time warp gone, now you'll just be picking, I don't know, the random few seconds of a buff proc instead to do your stuff. Fire then, generally it's an okay spot, but it has got some fixes lined up, mostly to tidy up maintenance buffs and a lack of AoE choice, where now Living Bomb is a major component of AoE, and it's a passive applied with Fire Blast with Lit Fuse. Then we've got the improved Scorch buff, so that is now 2 stacks instead of 3, and there's a choice talent to add passive damage instead. And that means that if you want a more passive option, you've got that, but Feel the Burn is definitely still intended to be one of the harder parts of fire gameplay where you can show your skill. Next then, Sun King's Blessing. So that's been nerfed a bit to make Unleash Inferno, which has now got some nice AoE buffs, a bit more enticing for players, and there's a bit more gameplay in Phoenix Flames through a few talents as well. Nothing absolutely gigantic, but absolutely plenty of tweaks. Frost Mages then have only seen minor changes so far. There's some talent swapping, 2-pointers being turned into 1-pointers, and a new stacking damage buff during Icy Veins. Unholy saw the most changes of the lot, and it's mostly focused in fixing up the tree, cleaning up their cooldowns, and giving players a bit more choice. Army of the Dead is now a flat 3 minutes instead of 8 minutes with a bunch of cooldown reduction, so it should be more predictable, and then Apocalypse, Dark Transformation, and Unholy Blight are now on 90 and 45-second cooldowns. Then Epidemic and Outbreak have been made baseline. This is not perfect, but it is a much nicer tree to work with, and the big fix to needing Death and Decay uptime to cleave is a little lazy. Basically, the cleave effect is just going to stay for 4 seconds after you leave Death and Decay. So the core gameplay of Death and Decay being very important, that is still there, but it just has a bit more usability. Then Sudden Doom does not give you free coils anymore, but instead they're cheaper, they're buffed, and they pop wounds, while every 20 wounds that you pop upgrades Festering Strike to Festering Scythe for 12 seconds, applying loads of wounds in AoE, which does sound pretty neat to me. Then next, if you're a Gargoyle hater, good news, because you now get a choice talent that gives you more Mage's spawns, which also do AoE damage, and that will actually make for a much more smooth dungeon damage profile. So overall, I'd say all very welcome improvements. Okay, Frost then. There's been a bunch of changes, basically getting new auto attack focus talents and Icy Talons buffs to essentially turn that into more of a gameplay focus. Then also, Breath of Sindragosa has been changed to be more of a short-term duration damage window than something that you will be trying to keep up absolutely forever. Now, I have heard feedback that for some people, they haven't went too far, and it still feels like something that they might want to extend to the point where they just feel it's kind of like dominating the identity of the spec. So maybe room for iteration there, but it does seem like they're moving in the right direction. Next then, they've added a talent so that Killing Machine procs launch glacial advances for AoE, which is pretty class, and also just a tree rearrangement that has generally improved pathing. I mean, it's still the same idea, but basically with more compelling options to play around with. And another cool thing, Frost Scythe has been reworked, and people might actually use it now. Essentially, right, it's huge AoE damage on a short cooldown with there being a cooldown reduction from Killing Machine procs. So it does seem like it's got a bit more of a tidied up identity within the spec, just more of a clear niche, and to be honest with you, it just looks and feels really cool to use, so I hope it's something people can talent into. Blood then has also gotten some real nice changes. Basically, it's generating bones on pull, Blood Drinker damage reduction, a silence being added to Gore Fiends in place of a damage buff, and Bone Storm now uses your Bone Shield instead of runic power. And I think overall this stuff is leaving Blood just feeling really good to people. On to our next class, and it is the Paladin, which I'm excited about. There is great news for Rat, which I think is going to be one of my new main specs. Anyway, Prot first. Prot has had a Bastion of Light redesign to instead grant more holy power from Judgment for 5 casts. Their Avenger Shield AoE versus single target choice basically isn't a choice anymore, and a few other tiny changes. As an example, Consecration's damage reduction lasts for 4 seconds after you leave it. I suppose a bit inspired by what they did with Death and Decay earlier with the DKs, and that basically means you won't get one tapped if you don't replace it on cooldown, so that's a nice bit of usability. Next then, Holy. You guys are seeing Light of the Martyr replaced with a passive version that gives them a heal absorb whenever they use Holy Shock instead of actually draining their HP. Probably good. Also, Light's Hammer is gone, which, I mean, is a little bit funny, and their Holy Power spenders have been buffed, though with a nerf to Beacon. The thing is, though, will it be enough to make them worth pressing? I don't know. We'll see with balance. And a strange thing, too. Blessing of Summer has actually had a redesign to be a healing to damage transfer and vice versa. I suppose a bit like Nature's Vigil and Ancestral Guidance. So, bit different. To the thing I'm excited about, though, Rat. It's got the most changes. It's a real laundry list, but I'll try to boil them down pretty quickly for you. So, there's a new option that replaces Avenging Wrath with a passive that procs Avenging Wrath automatically whenever you press Wake of Ashes. And that basically means Wake of Ashes feels awesome to press, so it's pretty neat. And I guess for a lot of people, a nice little consolidation of buttons. And when you take that, other things can also proc it for a few seconds as well. It's pretty cool. The rest of the changes then are around making the dot-oriented gameplay just a bit more interesting. Things like, say, the Wake of Ashes burn, the expurgation from Blades, and Templar Slash's new dot. The Mastery has also given a new addition where it has a chance to give Judgment extra damage. Most of that is to basically make the split between AoE and single target a little bit less frustrating to talent around, with just a bunch of other changes being done within the tree to polish up pathing and basically fix up issues with there being point sinks in the tree. And then also to fix up, thankfully, the lack of stat build choices, especially where crit is concerned. Basically, it's all good stuff, and honestly, I think Ret is just straight up one of the best specs in the game at this point. It's powerful, it's got lots of utility, it's got great room for like you to show mastery within a raid. Oh, I just think it's the whole package. Druid time though. So, the class tree has been pretty massively changed to move the stronger options towards the bottom, but in exchange, there is better pathing at the top and some nice new talents like Fluid Form, which lets you use specific abilities to change form instead of wasting a GCD on the shapeshift. Oh, thank God, that will feel better. Balance, then, is probably getting the biggest changes. Primordial Arcanic Pulsar is gone because it was too overwhelmingly strong. I mean, come on, it would have to be with an awesome name like that. But instead, you are getting a flat buff and a choice between a 2 or 3 minute stronger cooldown to make up for its loss. Then your AP generation is being nerfed to make pulling more of a decision that you're making, but you are getting free spender procs instead, and those are going to work with a dot amplifying buff that is applied by Star Surge. Most of the changes then are around opening up options for damage profiles, instead of, I suppose, you just feeling like you've got to go and just pick whatever made your pap windows go harder. So, stuff that looks good on paper, but it will probably feel like an overall nerf. Okay, Feral then. Feral is also getting their resources tanked. Tiger's Fury extensions and resets are gone, and energy regen is reduced. As somebody who's not played Feral in a while, that sounds really rough to me, and from Matt's experience playing it, it does not feel good at all. Now, the point is to basically move it back to its design goal of playing around energy and Tiger's Fury windows instead of basically just having everything buffed all the time. I get the design intent, but if it feels like a nerf, it could be a problem. Next then, AoE. So, AoE has actually been reworked by basically removing tear open wounds. So, instead of spamming Primal Wrath, the way to play is going to be applying buffed rips with Primal Wrath and then Ferocious Bite with Rampant Ferocity instead, basically only wrathing to refresh rip and not for the damage. So, that's going on there. Then their Berserk and Incarn durations were reduced as well. So, overall, it's a bit of a funny picture here. Basically, the game feel, it just seems like an absolutely massive nerf bat. Now, of course, raw buffs to numbers can make this not be a loss in terms of your DPS or anything. I think it's just a feeling that's different, and I think not necessarily for the better, even though there is maybe more design identity in where they're going right now. So that'll definitely need playtesting. Okay, Resto then. Resto actually loses Adaptive Swarm, but it does gain a regular Heart of the Wild proc that they can activate basically whenever for hybrid damage windows, even without talenting the spell itself. Rejuve is getting a huge buff and a talent to do instant healing, but Flourish and Photosynthesis, those are actually being moved to a choice node instead of both of them being available to you at the same time. Now, overall, it does sound pretty good, but it is definitely a case of there being give and take. That being said, though, having 2 Swiftmen charges and a stronger Rejuve will probably make it, like, a bit more simple, easier to pick up. Maybe that will help with the healing problem. Okay, Guardian then. Like most tanks, basically, you got nothing just yet. There have, though, been the class tree rearrangements, but yes, do expect something, though. I mean, especially Guardian, because the current spec tree is just a bit of a mess. Next on Monks, where plenty has happened, so there's been a giant overhaul of the class tree, and the short version here is that most throughput has been removed from the class tree in favor of more utility. Good thing, though, is that's mostly being baked into existing spells. As an example, Disable will now soothe enrages, and Roll has actually got a snare component. Also, in pretty great news, the statues, those have been removed for the off specs, so like no more White Tiger for everybody. Another thing is Chi Wave has actually been changed. It is now a passive, and they've done that to reduce button bloat, and they've also got some new movement options. It's pretty fun. As an example, a Transcendence that links to an ally's location. It's pretty cool. A double jump dash thingy you can do after roll. That's really cool. And basically an auto gap closer after rolling. So like, yeah, that's fun. That immediately just makes me think, oh, awesome. Monks can just do more. And also, you get a 15% out of combat move speed boost. Yeah, I'm going to rate that with a hell yes. Okay, Brewmaster. Well, you're one of the tanks who have actually got changes at this stage anyway. So, the quick version here is the loss of Bone Dust Brew and Healing Elixir, but a bunch of Stagger and Purifying Brew improvements have been added, basically so that stuff is like looping into each other. The point is that Purifying Stagger will feel more worthwhile and will help your survivability more at higher levels of play. I think that's good. It's doubling down on what the core identity of the spec is. Though I guess I do wonder about their self-sustain. Anyway, both Improved Celestial Brew and Purifying Brew are now also baseline. Mistweaver then. So you guys are finally using Essence Font. Renewing Mists is getting a talent to give it a crazy healing take and buff for a bit, and some good news, Rising Sun Kick gets one to trigger gusts, and that does mean that Mastery is not dead for Fistweavers, so I suppose we can take that as a win. Then Teachings of the Monastery is baseline. Now, Blizzard said they've still got quite a lot of work to do on raid healing, so I would expect to see plenty of changes. Still, Mistweaver I think is a great spec, so it's not like it really needs too much more. Okay then. Time to talk about Windwalker Monk. They had a lot of work done, like really a lot. It's honestly hard to know where to start. But let's just do it with Serenity, which has been deleted. There's now a new option instead of hit combo called Flurry of Juan, which basically is a proc that looks really cool. A bunch of builds are being opened up with some new talents, right? Like a single target focused stomp that doesn't reset, a Whirling Dragon Punch that gives you 8 stacks of Ancient Teachings, and Rushing Jade Wind, but in the form of a passive. Yes, a passive that is activated by Strike of the Windlord. I think that's much nicer. There's starting combat with 2 chi, there's combo strikes being triggered by Storm, Earth, and Fire, and Spinning Crane Kick. Well, Spinning Crane Kick now does not prevent auto attacks. So altogether, right, it is just a massive heap of changes that's honestly kind of hard to describe, except that honestly, I think Windwalkers should be feeling pretty pumped for their new toys and a lot of these things that are being fixed up. Now, whoever's in charge of Rogue is clearly a bit more focused on touching up the incomplete hero talents rather than just doing massive amounts of class changes, but they still do have a bit going on. We've got a stacking auto damage and move speed buff in combat, and we've got Shadow Dance and Night Stalker being removed from the class tree, so that's fairly big. Now, having these together was of course just a bit too strong, and it really did overwhelm the class tree a little, so that seems good. Now, Subtlety does still get 2 charges, but from its own tree instead, but not many changes beyond that, except that Pre-Med now makes your next generator fill your points after stealthing, and talents have swapped about locations a bit. Big picture, there is likely more to come, so let's move on to Outlaw, which now has got Adrenaline Rush scale with haste instead of being a flat 25% boost to GCD speed. Sepsis is gone, and more talent shuffling has went on to improve pathing. The range of Blade Flurry has also been increased to 8 yards instead of just being melee range, so I guess that'll be pretty handy. Assassination then also loses Sepsis, but also has Serrated Bone Spike turned into a passive applied by Rupture, and a new talent that gives Envenom 10% bonus damage while already active, which very much is just pushing the gameplay of like keeping up your Envenom uptime. Next then, Warriors. Well, class-wise, you guys have got a lot of reorganization. Utility is way easier to get to, but you do lose some rage generation talents. Things like, say, Shockwave, Thunderous Roar, and Spear have all got less or no rage attached, but your specs are getting some pretty big changes too to go along with that. Arms then, you guys were swimming in rage, and often it felt bad more than good. You had too many resources, lots of resets overlapping, and to that end, well, Arms has lost a ton of rage and has got less of a chance to reset overpower, but instead you've got things like a chance of free whirlwinds and cleaves, and you've got some lower rage costs. Now, the fun thing is that cleave is down to 3 seconds and it triggers fervor, which means it's basically more important in the AoE rotation. Blizz have also switched up the tree plenty, and they've buffed alternatives to all the Test of Might talents, so basically it seems you'll be able to pick talents instead of just needing to run that particular one. The last thing of note then is that now Arms and Fury both get to pick either Bladestorm or Ravager as choice nodes. Next, Fury Warrior. So, Fury had a problem where it struggled with wanting to press Bloodthirst, which kind of sucked because it's their most iconic ability. So, it's getting buffed in almost every way, even extending current enrages if it doesn't refresh it. Also, Annihilator is dead. Instead, there's an alternative to Frenzied Enrage that makes Enrage last a bit longer and buffs overall damage, so basically you can still have a less RSI-inducing Fury experience without half the talent tree becoming useless like with Annihilator. Then you also get Bladestorm back if you want to use that over Ravager. Protection then. Prada's only got a few tiny changes, but they are impactful. Defensive Stance no longer has a damage penalty, so you can stay in it for the damage reduction. Battle Stance is still better for DPS with 3% crit, but if you don't want to stance, you're not going to be punished anywhere near as hard. The other impact is a new talent that reduces their magic damage taken by 5%, which certainly will smooth out one of their weaknesses as a tank. Priests then, this will be real quick. Basically, for Discipline, Rapture only works on the next 3 power word shields, but it buffs them by a pretty whopping 80%. That's it for the changes. Maybe there will be more, but certainly those are going to be some pretty damn big shields. Okay, so there you have it. A very quick rundown of all of the changes so far. And my goal here is that essentially you're getting a bit of a TLDR, right? We will have to do way more in-depth testing. And the good news is that with beta and like endgame templates soon being a thing, we'll be able to do that properly and bring you good deep dives into every single class. In terms of changes though, Demon Hunters are still waiting. It seems that Hunters are also waiting. Evokers have got almost nothing yet, except for some quality of life and buffs to Firestorm and minor changes to Preservation's tree pathing. Shamans are rather in the same boat. We'll again just have to wait for some more beta builds to see what the meat is on those guys. So my question is, how are you feeling? I mean, I know it's a bit hard to wrap your head around all of this because this is all on top of the hero talent trees, which are 2 per spec. And again, we'll be back with far more in-depth coverage on every single class
once it is beta and we get to do that like proper endgame testing. Anyway, that's your TLDR. Not that this was a particularly short video, but it turns out trying to cover 30 whatever specs in one video is actually insane. Maybe we should have done a different plan. Anyway, let me know how you're feeling. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.